Hello. Go ahead.
Hi, Carl. What's up, man?
Not too much. How are you doing?
I'm great. Nice to meet you.
Good to meet you.
So you're the podcast guru, huh?
I'm one of the guys,
I like
one of
it.
the gurus and the shurus or whatever. Yeah. I see there's a few of them in this community.
There's a few lurking
Yeah.
around. Whether
Yeah.
admittedly or not, they're out there.
Yeah. This was a transition during COVID. I was again 25 years in radio broadcasting and COVID hit, which changed not that the broadcast industry needed any other changes to upset it, but
Hey,
it meant an opportunity to say goodbye
yeah.
and
I'm
take a part-time business that was in speaker training and morph that into podcast. Started with podcast training, and then actually now we run an agency that gets people launched, and we've got, I don't know, 8 or 10 shows we do on a regular basis, adding more all the time. So yeah.
That's great, man. I mean,
Mm.
the thing about podcasting, there's so many things that are going through my head now, but
Yeah.
it's amazing how it did explode like over the pandemic. Like I've been doing it since 2011. I've been doing interviews with
Okay.
musicians. So I never really factored in other than I'm just doing interviews, and then all of a sudden it's like there was an uptick, and then podcasting became the thing. I kind of branched out and I do the famous interview series, but I
Right.
find it to be such a nice alternative for people out there that have a message that don't have to be corporate. They don't have to have
Mhm.
any kind of fences around them. It just seems like we can all run free in the field.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's certainly, yeah, that's a really good way to describe it, actually, because in the corporate entity, especially in areas like finance or real estate, there's rules and regs and what do they call it, compliance, and don't say things you shouldn't, that.
Uh-huh.
So it really deters people working in those organizations to talk about their their knowledge, what they do. But certainly for entrepreneurs, and I work a lot with coaches, consultants. I do work with professionals who are in real estate investing, or if they're in finance, they run their own companies, kind of thing. But
Sure.
or doctors or lawyers. But there's still, but you're right. There's no rule.
Right.
There's no. It has to be like this. It's not like, again, I come from a radio world, so it's not like,
Exactly.
well, this is how we do radio programming, and if we're a rock station, we sound like this. If we're a country, we sound like this. If we're jazz or classical, well, we sound like this. Like there's no hard and fast rule to it, and that's, I think, firstly what makes it challenging for people coming into the space, because they go, well, who am I and how do I fit here? And then once they figure that out, then it's like, oh my god, like there is no limit, right, as to
Right.
what I can do. But it certainly does make it less. It makes it easier to play the game,
Yeah.
and get that recognition. It's still it's still on this side of the table, I guess
Yeah.
you could say. It's still a challenge to show people that this is as effective, sometimes more effective than writing a book,
Yeah.
or traveling around the world speaking, which some people still do.
Yeah.
And it's great. I mean, I'm not saying don't do that. I'm just saying
Sure.
that you can cover a lot of ground in 52 weeks on 52 different podcasts or more.
Yeah.
Right. So,
Well,
anyways, it's an interesting space.
and that's the beauty of it is that, I've tried to explain this to my wife. Like, people have advertising budgets and they can either allocate it to put signs on benches at bus stops or on
Yeah.
billboards or whatever. But this seems to be the most therapeutic way, most humane way, most penetratable way to get your message out. And I think
Yeah.
we all get to understand that we're more alike than we're not. It's kind of bridging, I think, levels of gaps that we all have in this very divided political environment we're in. We can all be like, hey, we're all human beings. We're all trying to survive every day and do the best we can. And it's a
Yeah.
really good platform for that, I think. And I think that's what COVID showed us. Even though we have Zoom and we have these technological platforms, the human connection is what we really craved and really wanted because we were separated from it for so long.
100%. And I think that's why people are moving back to wanting to be in person, either meeting people, virtual, not virtual, physical networking or meetups or whatever, because we spent that 2.5 or 3 years locked down. We couldn't go out and play. Now we want to go see our friends again and have that experience. Whereas, if we had this discussion 5 years ago or even 10 years ago, people would be saying, oh, you know what, everything's moving virtually. Everything eventually will be virtual. And it is to a degree.
Yeah.
We still crave that human connection, but we get that human connection, I believe, more deeply when we have that intimate relationship with somebody who we know, like, and trust.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the reasons why people gravitate to, or have gravitated over the years to, radio, is because they have the feeling that they have that companionship. The person that's talking at them through the box, if they're really good at broadcasting, they know how to get into their heart and their soul and make them do things, right? In a wise way, not in a manipulative way, but certainly in a way that gives them that companionship. It was interesting because I guess it was about 2008, maybe 2010. There was some research done. I think it was done here in Canada, and it showcased what people were, or why people were listening at certain hours of the day to the radio. And at every point you could see it wasn't because they were trying to win a contest to, go to, Barbados or something like that. No, it was because it was that companionship while they were working, for example, or in the evening. What the research showed is that there were a lot of single people who listened to the radio in the evening because they had that companionship, unless they were going out and meeting people, but they had that companionship. So podcasting is kind of like that. It's what I like about it is it compartmentalizes it. So if you want to listen to something that's do it yourself or business related, or something that's related to faith, something that's related to true crime, or some of the top podcasts in true crime, you want to listen to that, you've got that you can tune into and have that, I say intimate relationship, but have that connection and feel like you're connected to it in that moment.
Yeah, for sure. Well, let's sink our claws into the world of Carl Richards. And what I would like to do first and foremost is ask you, how did you survive that COVID period? And how did it change the way that you live your life now?
Oh my goodness. How did I survive? Do we want to be political here or not? It was, it was a very interesting time. I was working in broadcasting still at the time. I was a morning show co-host. And when we got the news that, hey, we're locking down, it was a rough go, because our regular programming overnight was thrown out. It completely upset everything that we did in that space. So it went from having fun in the morning and cracking jokes and doing regular contesting to, okay, now we have to talk about what's serious. We have to talk about the local health unit is saying, and we have to talk about what when our prime minister is doing his thing, right? So that became the focus of almost every news story, almost everything we were talking about. We were trying to put a human spin on it, though, and keep it positive. Man, was that ever tough, as we're getting these reports around the world of, how many people have died here. And when you work in that, all the time, it's very hard to unplug. So I would come home from doing the morning show. I would have a nap because I'm tired, right?
Yeah.
But then I get up at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and guess what? It starts all over again, because I want to know what's happening in the moment. What are the new numbers? What's the new information? What has the health unit said recently? So I was prepared for the next morning, which by then again, it would change again.
Yeah.
But man, oh man, I was so embroiled in it that it got to the point where my boss came to me and said, you know what? If you need to unplug, unplug. And I insist that you do. Between the hours of this and this, I know it's hard, but unplug. So I did. There was an interesting thing that happened, though, when COVID did hit. Advertising in the radio world, at least here in Canada, it dropped by 70%.
Wow.
Because everything was shuttered, right? All these local businesses that rely on, these mom and pop stores that rely on local, local advertising dollars, people coming into their store and them advertising locally. Well, that was all gone. And even the bigger corporations, they didn't have a lot of money to spend either. Like, they're like, well, we don't want to, blow our cash wad on stuff that's not happening. So the bigger companies, they had some campaigning, but still it was a lot of the smaller mom and pop shops that they're all shuttered. and here in Canada, we had some great financial assistance from our government, but it still meant that there were industries that were suffering, and broadcasting was one of them. And it's been kicked in the teeth a number of times over the years through, streaming services and downloads and things like that. So this was just another blow. And I was eventually escorted out the door, as were 7 other people in my building. But that was the reinvention for me, because they say you don't make it in the broadcasting space until you've been fired from at least one job. Well, my first firing was back in 2010, and I was like, yes, I've made it. I'm officially a broadcaster now. And I was kind of figuring out, what am I going to do with my life? And it was then that I started a part-time business doing speaker training. It's something I became passionate about, even though I stuttered when I was a kid. I'm pretty good at speaking. So I thought, you know what, I can take this and run with it, and that could become a business. Got back into radio. That sustained me through through to 2020. And that's when, as I said, that's when things went south, and I was given the opportunity to leave.
Yeah.
So I was thinking, okay, well, I have a part-time business now doing speaker training, which is trying to get people on physical stages, but there were no physical stages. So what am I doing? So I'm like, okay, well, I've been bitten by this podcast bug, and it's all Sam Crowley's fault, by the way, because I was at one of his events a few years earlier, and he said, you can have a podcast. Anyone can have a podcast. So I launched one. Even I didn't know what I was doing. Then I'm like, okay, well, now's an opportunity for me to get people onto virtual stages, and a podcast just made sense. And that's where that took me. The personal life, though, man, oh man. I mean, it was a huge shift to go from, I'm up every morning at, I don't know if I want to tell you what time I was up every morning, but it was, somewhere between 2:30 and 3 in the morning. I'm up every morning. Now I'm like, okay, I get to sleep in, but no, you don't get to sleep in, because you get to sleep a little bit longer. But now your focus is shifting, because you're now building a business. Even though I already had a part-time business, I'm building a business from the ground up, because it had very little relation to what I had been doing previously part-time. The only relationship is it's all about my voice, right? And it's all about communication. That was the only parallel. But within a few weeks, I was able to create a program, build a Facebook group, and get people into some workshops. And that's sort of where things started, was getting into that space. And I had a very supportive spouse who said, hey, you know what? And again, job market, think about this. I'm let go in the beginning of a pandemic. Jobs are pretty tight to begin with right now, because nobody's working. So I said, I'm gonna go into business for myself. And so I had that support, but man, it was scary. There were some months where I'm looking at my bank balance going, can you carry us this month? Oh yeah, no problem. So that in itself was a reinvention. And I didn't know, even if I was entrepreneurial enough to be able to survive, that, they say, what is it? Your first year in business, you're lucky if you make it. Only 90%, only 10% of businesses make it. And I think only half of those make it to year 5. Well, I'm at year 3, and I'm doing pretty good. So, but it was very challenging to get into that mindset of, even though I'm working from home, as everyone was at the time, it's still work. Even though I'm self-employed, it's still work. Yes, I have a lot of freedom and flexibility, but it's still work. One of the first things I did fairly early in that journey is I got a coach. I think that I would not have still been self-employed if I didn't have a coach to keep me accountable. And that accountability has been huge. But I also, again, having a supportive spouse is great, but feeling like I'm accountable to my family, my spouse, my future, my goals, all of those things. So there's a huge transformation in my life in that 3 period. So that's how I survived COVID. Very healthy on the end of it. We did eventually, from a health perspective, we both did get COVID at the same time, which was convenient. One of us lived upstairs, one of us lived down. Thank goodness for 2 televisions in the house. But man, and it was later in the pandemic. I think it was 2022 is when we got it. So it wasn't like it was the onset where there's no and we were both, again, not to get into a political discussion, but we were both vaccinated and did all of those things. But it could have been a different story if it had been earlier on, and it certainly would have been a different story, I think, if I was still working in a job, because in the work world, like, taking more than 2 weeks off work and you're into a different realm of, I think it's like long-term disability or whatever it is. I mean, it's like I only have COVID. Come on, like let me go back to work.
Yeah.
But it definitely was an interesting time. And I
Yeah.
still see that there's still a lot of post-COVID trepidation,
Oh
if I
yeah.
could say that. A lot of people who are still, I don't know, I'm not saying they're afraid to go outside, but they're waiting for what's next. It's like, don't wait for what's next. Like, I mean, be thankful for what you have today
Yeah.
and what is being presented to us. And take the bull by the horns, and allow yourself to live. And I think that was a gift, I think, from COVID, is being able to live and
Yeah.
live like I hadn't had a chance to live before.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well said. What did you want to be when you were a kid? What was your dream? Has it always been radio?
You know what? I actually wanted to be an actor.
Nice.
I wanted to be an actor, and I went to a sound test, or a acting test, or whatever it was. They were holding one in Toronto, and my dad drove me up, and I think it was 13. And I did very well in this test. And they basically have you read a 30-second TV commercial, and then they look at it and they give you an assessment. They say, well, you'd be great for boy next door roles or this. And this is back in the day when I had hair and was much younger. Uh, anyways, and I remember the car ride home, and part of the pitch was, well, you could send your kid and they can take these acting courses. And I believe that one of the people who had been through this course was a guy by the name of, maybe you've heard of him, Jim Carrey, had been through this TV soundstage, or whatever it was, program. And Jim Carrey was not well known back then, right? But I remember my dad saying, yeah, we don't really have the money to send you to this acting course. And I don't even remember how much it was. It might have been $1,000 or something, which now you look at it and go, that's it.
Yeah.
But back then, I mean, $1,000 in the 80s with, dad who worked
Oh.
at the steel factory, always that chance that, oh, there could be layoffs. And, when interest rates back then were like 20%, and they're trying to keep a mortgage, right? So it's like, yeah, we can't afford to send you to acting school. So I developed another love, and I always loved the radio. And I used to listen to it religiously, to especially the morning show. They would have goofy characters that they created. One of them was Mr. Science, for example. This character that had like a laboratory in his house, a white picket fence, and we're going to go visit Mr. Science, and he would always blow something up. And so I really fell in love with that theater of the mind.
Mhm.
And that was sort of the turning point. I thought, well, if I can't be an actor, or if I'm not able to go to acting school, um, why not check out this radio thing? I mean, there are a lot of famous people who started in radio, who ended up, or in radio, who ended up transitioning into television. Alex Trebek, you know, rest his soul,
Yeah.
started in radio here in Canada. Lauren Green was another one that started in radio
Yeah.
back in the day. And others too have taken that path where they're broadcasters and then they transition into either television or movies, or stuff like that. So
Sure.
I thought, you know what, I'm going to go that route. And I just fell in love with the medium, studied at community college, and loved it, and graduated top of the class. And then finding a radio gig was a challenge that
Yeah.
back then. But you know what? I totally loved it while I was working in it.
Yeah. So who's been a hero for you in your life? Who's been an inspiration?
Oh my goodness, so many people. I well, you probably hear this a lot, but my parents, I think,
Sure.
have inspired me a lot. But I think if I was to think of someone who really inspires me and keeps inspiring me all the time, it's probably a guy by the name of Mike Lipkin. And Mike Lipkin has a very interesting story. He's a professional speaker. He used to stutter when he was younger. I think that's part of the inspiration too, because I stuttered when I was younger and he stuttered when he was younger. And I remember hearing his story. He continues to inspire me because everything that happens in the world, as things evolve, Mike Lipkin is evolving with it, and very efficiently and effectively. And he's not getting any younger. He's probably 10, 15 years on me. And every time there's a change. So when I first saw him on stage, it was somewhere around 2008, and it was at a Toastmasters conference. And I remember hearing him speak and tell his story. He's been on several stages since then. He's written, I don't know how many books. He's helped, I don't know how many people. but his message is still inspiring. And also the tone of his voice and the way he delivers. It's just amazing too. So when I hear him speak, it's inspiring, it's motivating. It gets me off my keister to get stuff done. So he's one that continuously inspires me. And I remember reaching out to him when I started my business, my speaking business, long time ago. And I can't remember what I reached out to him for, but I made a comment or something about something I'd read or heard about him. And he messaged me back. And that was very cool that Mike Lipkin messaged me back. I'm like, oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So I've kept that in mind, and I would love to share a stage with him. Actually, maybe I should get him on my podcast. That'd be cool. I gotta ask him, Mike, will you come on my podcast? You've been such an inspiration to me.
Yeah, that leads into my next one. The baton's naturally getting led. I was wondering who would be a dream interview, someone that you would love to meet.
Certainly him for sure, because we've not met. I mean, unofficially, I guess in 2008 at that Toastmasters conference, I might have, shook his hand and gone, good talk. That would have been the extent of it, right?
Yeah.
But I think other individuals who I think really inspire me. One of them I think is Jack Canfield, for sure. And I would love to have him on my show too. And I think it's not that he's hit this guru status, and again, I've said, know a little bit about his story as well. But he's just a genuine down-to-earth guy. For anyone that's met him or had a chance to work with him, they say, yeah, Jack's the real deal. There's no smoke and mirrors with Jack.
Yeah.
Even though he's written, again, I don't know how many books.
Yeah.
He's still this down-to-earth guy.
Yeah.
That it's kind of like your grandfather showing up for Christmas dinner, that kind of chill, how's it going? Kind of thing, from what I've heard. So he would be one that I would definitely love to meet and certainly have on my show for sure.
So let me ask you this. If you could see any event in human history with your own eyes, go back in time, what would you love to have seen?
Oh my goodness. Being a radio geek, probably whenever the switch was flicked, I guess, in the pop music world. So the kind of the birthing of the rock and roll era.
Yeah.
I've seen enough documentaries about it to get a feel for it. I'm talking back to the days of, Alan Freed, Chuck Berry, Elvis, Bill Haley and the Comets, because it was such an exciting time. There was a lot of unrest and, politically in the world, but there was certainly an evolution in the world of music. This is when a lot of, African Americans were already in music, but they were certainly taking this new vibe, this new beat, and they were bringing their own interpretation of it forward. Girls groups that also had been around before, but their sound was evolving. It was a very exciting time musically, and I think sometimes we forget that what we hear today is a direct result of that happened back then. And I'm going to go out on a limb here, maybe make myself sound a little bit old, but there hasn't really been a lot of originality in music for several years.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of repetition. There's been a lot of, sampling of other artists. But I think that original, oh my goodness, that's a new sound. No one's ever sounded like that.
Yeah.
That has, and again, I'd have to go through every single song in the last 15 years to be able to justify it, but there hasn't really been a lot that's new. It's like, oh, that sounds like so-and-so from 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 30 years ago, 50 years ago. So that's where I would love to journey back to.
So what's the motivator for you every day? What gets you out of bed? What gets you to do your work and to do it the way that you want it done?
The dog, he usually has to pee.
That's right.
That gets me out of.
Got to go outside. I get it.
But seriously, I think the motivation for me that gets me out of bed every morning is knowing that because I've been on this journey or in this place as well, where I know there are entrepreneurs, I know there are business owners that want something different. They want to see their business cross 6 figures or 7 figures, or they want something different for their family. They want something different for their future, but there's something either holding them back or there's something that they don't know yet. And I'm finding that it's about podcasting, but that's what keeps me going. Is it reminds me that there's so much opportunity out there. And if we just embrace it, that things can change like that.
Uh,
So that for me is the motivation, is being able to get my message out there. And I share a brain with another podcaster. Actually, I think I have it today, I hope. But the founder of Podmatch, and we have very similar philosophies when it comes to the podcasting space. And we have discussions on a regular basis, and we talk about, why don't people know about this, or what about this, or what about this?
mhm.
And it really primes me to just go out and make that one more call, or connect with that one more individual, because it's the difference between struggling, being in that place of hustle all the time, or being in that place where you're recognized for the hard work that you're doing, and it's time for you to not just shine, but get the results that you want.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is the motivation. And as the world shifts, I think we're seeing more and more people looking at different ways of doing things too.
I love Alex's passion. I'm so glad he reached out to me because it really, kind of helped me branch out and do a lot of things. So I love it. I mean, and that's the thing about podcasting right now. It's almost like space exploration. It's like, how fast can we get that rocket ship into outer space? It's not even really a race. It's such a fertile ground right now. And it's cool to think how many ways it's going to expand that we don't even know yet, how this thing's going to grow and mutate into something even better.
Well, imagine having this discussion even 4 years ago about
Right.
artificial intelligence dominating in the space. Now we have conversations about it almost on the daily. What AI tools are going to do in this space, and how are they going to enhance? And there's always that fear that, they're going to take over the world. Well, not if we don't let them.
Yeah.
Like there's a certain intelligence to our intelligence, to not allowing artificial intelligence to dominate. But that is something alone that has changed in this space. I mean, you've been in it since 2011.
Yeah.
How many podcasts were there in 2011?
Yeah.
Half a million,
Yeah.
quarter million, and
Yeah.
now there's like 3, 4, 5 million. Yeah, okay, there's pod fade, there's all those other factors that fit into that too, but that still means that compared to other well-established marketing tools, shall we say, like blogging, or just putting posts on social media, podcasting is still, it almost feels like it's in its infancy
Yeah.
stages, because there's
Agreed.
still not a lot of people. You're going to get me on my soapbox now. There's still not a lot of people that have said, "Oh yeah, I could do this," or whether they're their own host, whether they're just leveraging guesting. There's still people that go, "No, I'm just going to write a blog." Who's reading?
Yeah. Right.
Who's reading
Exactly.
1,000, 2,000 word blogs? Nobody is.
No.
Um, and this is such a unique space, and as you said, a unique time that, yeah, it is such fertile ground, and I say in some cases it's still untapped territory
Yeah.
for a lot of industries, and if not industries, then certainly a lot of solopreneurs that just
Yeah.
think they're going to do it the way it's been done. Even something like, there are networking groups now that are looking at doing their own podcast, whereas before networking groups wouldn't even think to have their own show. Why would they do that? Whether they do it as a value add for their members, or however they roll it out. But you wouldn't have heard that
Hmm.
5 years ago. And now
Yeah.
so there's still all kinds of opportunity though, and ideas that come forward. And, a guy like Alex is sharp as a whip.
Yeah.
That's why I say we share a brain. I think he has it most of the time. But yeah, there's so many opportunities there. And that's what gets me up every morning, is the opportunities to change lives and change mine at the same time.
So let's get to the marrow of the man, the myth, the legend. And what I want to ask you is, everyone has a perception of you, family, friends, clients, colleagues, but you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
Oh my goodness. If you'd asked me this when I was younger, I would have said, Captain Kirk. I'm just like him, and I know I'm not. Maybe more like Picard based on the hairstyle, but I would say, who am I? Wow. I am firstly, I'm a husband, number one. I'm a lover. I'm passionate about the people I connect with, and I'm driven. not just by my own goals, but I'm driven by the fact that we have a world that needs to be, we have a world that can be better than it is. And if I can change that one person or change the minds of several people along my journey, then I think I've achieved something great. So I think that being a person that is a change maker, I don't necessarily like that expression, but I think being a person that does affect change in the world, not only the world around him, but his own world as well. And that's how I see myself.
Well said, man. Carl, if anyone out there wants to learn more about you, hire you, anything about your world, where do they go?
Yeah, podcastsolutionsmadesimple.com is probably the easiest way to connect with me. Podcastsolutionsmadesimple.com. The link to all of my socials are there. I'm on Facebook, I'm on LinkedIn. And yeah, or check out the podcast. There's several of them there too, but they're on the website too. So I'd love to have a conversation with anybody. Always up for a virtual coffee.
Carl, this has been a pleasure, man. Thank you so much. I love your energy, your exuberance. It's so good that we ran into each other. I appreciate it, man.
Joe, thanks for having me.
Yes, sir. Enjoy the weekend, sir.